Hi, this is Ray Horner, and welcome to another edition of Horner's Corner, where we sit down with Akron's greats. And today, we're going to visit with a gentleman who has helped pave the way to a better Akron, in my point of view. Going back to the 60s, he was an integral part of Akron, and all the way in to the 2200s, he's still a part of Akron. We're sitting down today with Dave Lieberth, who began as a journalist in the 60s and 70s, and now he's a big part, and we'll say it in quotes, of Akron's history. Dave, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Ray. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Let's go back, because journalism started for you all the way back in school, as you were part of the Summit County Historical Society back then, and you had a vision that Akron was your place and you wanted to be part of it.
Yeah, well, I published my first newspaper when I was 12 years old in Barberton. We had a neighbor who had a copy machine, and we were able to circulate it, write the copy, and deliver it door to door in Barberton when I grew up. At St. Vincent's, I was on the staff of the newspaper, and so journalism always attracted me, and that really was kind of my first love and first occupation. After graduating from St. V's, I went to the University of Akron, became manager of the student radio station, and then worked at WHLO Radio for 10 years as news director.
And let's go to those days at WHLO. You and I have shared some stories through the years. That was interesting radio at that time. You were boots on the ground in so many ways, covering Akron's great stories. So talk about the experience at HLO, your news team, and really covering Akron front and center.
Well, when I started in 1968, it was really a rock and roll radio station. Some would say bubblegum music for the most part. But it was news on the hour and half hour, and we had a news staff of about a half a dozen people who worked through the week. And in those days, we actually went out and got news, something that doesn't happen very much anymore on any level of journalism. WHLO became an all news and talk radio station in 1974, and that's when I became news director and responsible for all news in the morning, all news in the afternoon, and then there were talk shows during the other day parts. We had a news staff of 12 people at that point, and matched to some extent what WAKR was doing in those days. WAKR certainly touted itself as the Akron news leader, and WHLO was very competitive, not only with WAKR, but really with the Akron Beacon Journal and the Cleveland Plain Dealer as well. We had a news team that would go out and get stories, and we were very successful in winning many awards from the Associated Press of Ohio.
We're talking with Dave Lieberth today on this month's edition of Horner's Corner. Dave, take us back to the HLO days, because you mentioned you went to the University of Akron and you ended up heading up the news department. I guess I wanted to ask you, first of all, major influences who taught you to be the news director and gatherer, or was this something, as you mentioned, in your school days, you were doing and collecting and writing news all the way back then? Talk about those days.
Well, I certainly had mentors in high school. The band director at St. Vincent's was one of my mentors. I was a musician. You know, Ray, I started off college as a music major. I played the trumpet. I could read a chart. I had a wonderful tone. And I taught music lessons to students in the elementary school at St. V's. And that's how I paid for my first year of college, by giving music lessons. And so after I was at the university, and I walked past WAUP, the radio station in Colby Hall, I was just taken with the fact that broadcasting was really where I wanted to be. But there was another important discovery I made. I discovered after 6 months of being a music major that I had no talent. I had no musical talent. And so it was pretty clear to me that I'd better take this broadcasting gig while it was being offered to me. And I could pronounce all the names of the classical music composers. So my first job as a volunteer announcer was announcing classical music records at WAUP.
WHLO, is there a story or two that you helped lead the team that stands out to you from your news and investigative reporting days?
Well, there are a couple probably. I can tell you about my very first night in the newsroom. First of all, most people would not know this, and it was not well known at the time, that I actually was supposed to be hired at WAKR.
Oh.
But Red Hageman, who was the news director at the time, had 2 applications, both from men named David. And he chose the one that he thought was me, but it was the other guy. And so I was free to go to WHLO and have my career there. My first night, though, in the newsroom was in July of 1968, and it was the 5th night of the riots on Worcester Avenue. And I was really thrown into the deep end of the pool that night. I walked into the newsroom, and the other more senior member of this news team said, "Get on the phone and start making calls." And so I was right in the middle of that. And 50 years later, I was able to do a documentary production, a live production about those riots in 1968, how Akron was at the time, how it had discriminated openly against African Americans for many years. Most people don't realize that Akron was a segregated city for most of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so by telling that story, I sort of went back to those days when I first started. The other thing that I did as a newsman, and in fact, when I was introduced once at the law school, Ray, the instructor, Dr. Marvin Moore, had not asked me for any biographical information. And so I thought that he would say, when he introduced me to his family law class, that Dave Lieberth was here. He was chairman of the Akron Bar's Committee on Family Law. He had written articles. He had lectured on family law. I thought that that would be how he would introduce me. But instead, he stood up and said, class, here's Dave Lieberth. He attended Elvis Presley's funeral. Dave? That was it. And I did attend Elvis Presley's funeral as a member of the WHLO news team. I had a roll of quarters, and in those days, prior to cell phones or radio transmissions that were in any way effective, I found a payphone across from Graceland and used quarters to call back reports to Steve Boom Boom Cannon's radio show.
I can't let you get away that easy. You got to tell me more about covering that Elvis funeral.
Well, we flew down. I flew down on my own, and really it was like I showed up in the morning, and the Memphis Chamber of Commerce had actually organized a media event and a media kind of press bus so that they would take us out to the Graceland Mansion. They cordoned off an area where the press could stand, and then I had to run to the gas station across the street to put my quarters in the phone and call back reports. At that time, the Beacon Journal reporter who had gone down with me was Peter Geiger, and he was the religion reporter for the Beacon Journal. Peter was there mostly because of his relationship with the man who presided at Elvis Presley's funeral, and that was Reverend Rex Humbard from Akron. And so he flew back, though. He didn't flew back with me. He flew back with Rex on his private jet.
Dave Lieberth is with us. He is one of Akron's greats, and he's our guest this month on Horner's Corner. You mentioned, Dave, law school.
Yeah.
So in 1978, you decide to change careers, and I'm sure it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction, but talk about your love for going to law school and changing your career in 1978.
Well, the first thing I'd have to tell you is that I didn't love law school at all. I was working early morning news, so I was getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, going in, clearing the wires, making the police calls and all of those things, being on the radio at 6 a.m., working until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, then going home, sleeping for 2 hours, and then going to school from 6:30 to 9:30, 3 nights a week. It was a rough road at that time, but I had no children at the time, didn't have a family, my wife worked, and so it was easier on me than a lot of those guys who drove from Youngstown, had kids at home, and were going to law school. But Akron provided that as an opportunity for many men and women in Northeast Ohio. And many of the great lawyers of the last 30 years were men and women who went to the University Law School during that period of time. My intention was, though, to stay in broadcasting. I thought that I would be the next Carl Stern, the next person covering the Supreme Court, and that was my career path, I thought. But we had family here, And I had a strong interest in the community and decided that this is where I belonged. And so once I made that decision, I started a law practice with Blakemore, Rosen, and Norris, and planted my feet here, and have been here now for the last 40 years.
Dave, you talked about the journalism and the music led you into the college radio station. Was it the covering news stories, the journalism aspect, and seeing the law from that side that led you into going to law school, or what brought you down that road?
Well, I went to a broadcasting convention for college students, and one of the speakers stood up and sort of shouted at all of these college broadcasters in the ballroom in New York City, "Learn something about the law." Because at that time, this is where the action was. And just as today, the action would be learn something about information technology or artificial intelligence. In those days, the law provided content in a substantive way that provided for a lot of careers. And so I thought that would be my career, but I was wrong. This was where I wanted to plant my feet. I had a strong interest in Akron. I had joined the Summit County Historical Society as a junior in high school, and so I already was kind of invested in the community and its history.
And speaking of history, Dave is part of Akron's history, and of course he's going to be a big part of history on down the road, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. I'm Ray Horner, Dave Lieberth with us on Horner's Corner as we talk with Akron's greats. So then let's go to 2002. Through your relationship with Mayor Plisquelic, you become deputy mayor in the city of Akron. So again, they're all coming together, but a change again in your career.
Yeah, when Don Plisquelic showed up at City Hall on his very first day as the 9th Ward councilman, I was there as a reporter covering City Council. And so I knew Don from the very first day he showed up at City Hall. And so that relationship continued on a very professional basis over the years. We never became fast friends. We didn't have a personal relationship as much as we had this professional relationship as reporter and newsmaker. And then after Don became mayor in 1987, excuse me, that was the year that the Inventors Hall of Fame was announced. I became president of the Inventors Hall of Fame, what we called Inventure Place. And of course, Don Plisquelic championed that cause while running for mayor. We were successful. Akron was selected as the site for the Inventors Hall of Fame. Mayor Plisquelic became the mayor then that same year, riding on the coattails of that campaign. And so he and I had, again, this professional relationship for all the years after that, up until 2002 when he asked me to come and work for him. And I became his chief of staff and deputy mayor for 10 years.
Akron Mayor Don Plisquelic, I really center in with the changing of the downtown, but you were a big part of that as well with the Downtown Akron Partnership, Adventure Place. Those were really good times of you guys all coming together, and it's not just the two of you, but so many minds coming together, looking at Akron now and on down the road to what we have today.
It had always occurred to me as a reporter, and during those years I was covering City Hall, the county government, and so forth, that downtown was going to be critical to Akron's future. And at that time, downtown was really falling apart. These were the years when Polsky's closed first, O'Neill's closed second, storefronts started becoming vacant. We had a music festival each year on the 4th of July. It was attended by crowds that were not family friendly, to put it bluntly. And so I saw an opportunity there that without people living downtown in 2002, we needed to have a device to get large crowds of people in downtown and to restore it so that people would feel comfortable bringing babes in arms and toddlers in hand and pushing strollers. And we did that by founding Lock 3 and the Lock 3 entertainment venue, which we did with WAKR and WQMX and Rubber City Radio. They were a big part of our early sponsorship and continued for the 10 years that I oversaw the work at Lock 3, the programming at Lock 3. In 2004, Mayor Pasqualik and I were in New York City for a bond meeting along with our chief financial officer, and we happened to be looking for a place for dinner one night. We went to Rockefeller Center. We were sitting at the American Cafe, and he looked out at that beautiful skating rink and said, "We need one of those in Akron." He said, "What would it take?" And I said, $100,000. And he said, "Let's do it." And so in 2004, we established the largest seasonal ice skating rink in Ohio and maintained that right up until today. We're fortunate that Lock 3 is undergoing a renovation today. It'll keep the skating rink, it'll keep the stage venue, and it has become kind of Akron's Central Park, for one of a better description.
Dave, when you look at the downtown Akron now and how it's changed in the last 25 years, and you and many others have been an integral part of that. You go to the Civic, to Canal Park, to Lock 3. Of course, Cascade Plaza has been there for so long. It's really completely different than the year 2000 and into the 1990s.
If you took a snapshot every 10 years of downtown Akron going all the way back to, let's say, 1940, you'd have a lot of different snapshots. It would never look the same twice. Downtown in the 50s was not the same as the 60s, which wasn't the same as the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or the aughts, and not today as well. So downtown is, I've described it as a fragile place. We had the benefit when I joined the mayor's office in '02 that we had about 25 to 30,000 people going to work on a daily basis in what we would call downtown Akron. And so that was the strongest asset that downtown Akron had, was this workforce that was coming downtown every day. Fast forward to today, 2024, we don't have that anymore. COVID demolished the downtown workforce, and we now have close to 1 million square feet of office space that is open and available for rent. And so once again, we're seeing change come to downtown Akron. I still feel very optimistic about its future, but it's going to be very different. It's never going back to the way it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, even though there are people who still have those kinds of dreams.
And the downtowns, this isn't an Akron-centric problem. COVID has changed the downtowns all over the country, and it's going to be ability of people like Dave Lieberth and other and cities across the country to change the landscape, and whether that's creating more areas of quality of life, more green space, creating something to keep people downtown, right, Dave? Because the workforce will change.
Living downtown.
Yeah.
The real secret to downtown success is people living downtown. We did not have that in the last 20 years, and just now we are creating that. We're sitting in the old B.F. Goodrich complex as we record this show in the Canal Place complex. And one of the newer elements of this complex is right over my shoulder here, and it's the Goodrich, which is a building housing about 100 apartment units rented at market rates for professionals, academics, students, elderly people, seniors, and a whole variety of people. We have that same population at the Bowery now, where we have 92 apartments that are occupied, across the street at 159 South Main, soon to be at City Center, which will have another 100 or more units. And so once again, Akron is changing. You know, and when I hear people talk about this nostalgia, the way that they want Akron the way it used to be, I ask them, what year would you want it to be? Because you pick a year, I guarantee you in that year, whether it was 1960 or 1950, there were people who were wishing it was 1940, and the people in 1940 was wishing it was 1930. You know, so Akron's downtown has always changed, just like our community has always changed. The difference is that Akron today looks better than it ever has in its entire history. It's cleaner, it's more organized, it's more effective. We have a smaller population, but we are right-sized. And in many ways, it is the size of Akron that is still our greatest asset.
You mentioned a couple of years. Let's talk about you leading the charge 1995 and 2008. You led the charge to get Akron named as All-American Cities.
We went to the National Civic League with projects in each of those years, and we were selected among all the cities in the country who applied that year to be All-America cities. It's a testament to what is also one of Akron's great assets, and that is our history of collaboration and cooperation. You know, when we brought the Inventors Hall of Fame to Akron, the astonishing thing to all of those patent lawyers from Washington, D.C. who were here, really very questioning whether Akron, Ohio was the right place for it, was when they walked into the City Club ballroom, and on that day was the CEO of Goodyear, the CEO of Firestone at that time, the CEO of B.F. Goodrich, the heads of every one of our banks, the heads of every one of our law firms. That was the kind of community spirit that was present to convince them that this was no ordinary city, that this was a very special place. And when we left that City Club luncheon with the patent lawyers who were very skeptical, we went down to the Orangerie Mall, and it was packed with people. And WAKR at that time led the effort for a petition campaign. We had over 20,000 signatures collected by WAKR and others to present to them these signatures of people of Akron saying, we want you to come here. And that motivated them in 1987 to select Akron as the home of the National Inventors Hall of Fame.
He's one of Akron's greats. He's Dave Lieberth with us this month on Horner's Corner. And you've heard us mention a couple of times during this conversation history, right? History of the past, some of the footprints from Dave Lieberth. Well, his footprint is going to be on history in the future as well. And let's talk about the project you've been working on for a few years now, and that's the Akron History Center. So update us on what this is going to be now and as we look on down the road as this unfolds, Dave.
Well, you say a few years, Ray, but it was actually 1983. It was exactly 40 years ago that I chaired a committee of the Historical Society and created a plan for a museum. That plan helped us bring the Inventors Hall of Fame here in 1987. That plan showed itself in 2003 when we opened the museum at Lock 3, the arcade museum that was often referred to as the Marble Museum. And when I left City Hall in 2012, I realized that if we were ever to realize one museum that had the entirety of Akron's 200-year history, it would need to be open on the 4th of July, 2025, the date we will celebrate Akron's bicentennial. And so about 3 years ago, Mayor Horrigan agreed to make a substantial investment in this new enterprise that we call the Akron History Center. It's 3,000 square feet of space located within the Bowery, and it will encompass 200 years of Akron history through the display of artifacts and exhibits. There are 34 flat screens that will have content on them for visitors to learn all about why Akron is such a special place.
And collecting these things, I know you're working with a lot of organizations, including the Akron-Summit County Public Library?
The Akron-Summit County Public Library is our partner and will operate the Akron History Center. But the artifacts collection is based at the Summit County Historical Society, at the Special Collections Division of the library, and at the University of Akron Archives, also the Lighter Than Air Society. And so those groups have loaned artifacts to the Akron History Center that'll be displayed, some of them for the first time ever. And some of them are very exciting, things that people will really enjoy seeing and will be moved by, I think, as well.
He's been our guest this month on Horner's Corner, and he certainly is one of Akron's greats for 60 plus years. History then and history in the future. Dave, thanks for joining us this month.
Thank you, Ray. It's been a pleasure.
We've been visiting with Dave Lieberth this month on Horner's Corner. I'm Ray Horner. Thanks for joining us.